Hi, and welcome to Ludonarrative Dissidents, episode 7. This is the quiet year. We're going to be talking about a map-telling, storytelling game from Avery Alder. She is a well-respected game designer. She has also written Dream Askew, Monster Hearts. Well, she wrote Monster Hearts 2nd Edition and Ribbon Drive, among many other games. Her website is buriedwithoutceremony.com. But this quiet year came out originally in 2013, and it is a quiet game of telling the story of a community in some kind of post-apocalyptic environment for a year. And you go through all the seasons, and the game ends when the Frost Shepherds arrive. Who are the Frost Shepherds? Well, it doesn't say. And that's sort of I think one of the elegant elements of this game is, in many ways, less is more. Yeah, this is probably the shortest game. Well, definitely the shortest game we've covered so far. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really interested in to hear what you have to say. I know I could talk about this game by myself for an hour and a half. But James, what was your first overall impression of the quiet year, and what does the game do?
What does the game do? The game it is a storytelling game. It's not a role-playing game. Explicitly, I don't think it ever claims to be a role-playing game. Mm-hmm. You play a community, a small, and as the name implies, quite quiet community, in a year after you have vanquished or got away from something. It's post-apocalypse, but a bad thing has happened. Most of the world has gone unpleasant. And you have a year in which to basically build your community, explore the local area, build the relationships between the people within the community, and just develop. And then another bad thing is coming. And the game ends, the narrative ends at that point. It is very rules light. It is incredibly rules light. Essentially, there's a deck of cards, which can be a customized deck or can just be an ordinary deck of 52 playing cards, using what they call the Oracle at the back of the thing. And each suit is one of the seasons. You shuffle each suit, you pile spring on top of summer, on top of autumn, on top of, because I'm British, on top of winter. And somewhere in the winter deck, you put the card for the frost sentries, the bad thing that is coming.
The Frost Shepherds, yes.
Shepherds.
The arbitrary end.
Yes. So you know they're coming. You don't know exactly at what point. And if you want a shorter version, then you can take some of the cards out. But in the full version, all the cards are going to be played out, or at least you're likely to miss some of the winter cards, but you'll get all the spring cards, all the summer cards, all the autumn cards, but you don't know in what order. You don't know in what's coming. And I want to make a point at that point that it sounds like it's going to be the same thing every time. It's going to be the same plot incidents, but actually there are a lot of games, in particular a lot of really good GMT games like Twilight Struggle and 1960 Making of a President, and things like that use a very similar mechanic. They are explicitly board games, but they have all the elements coming up, just not in. And those are real-world games. Those are games that are set explicitly in post-war, mostly American or Cold War history. The elements, you know what elements are going to come up. You just don't know in what order. And it's the order that they come up in that makes things really interesting because of cause and effect. Because one thing happening before another thing can change the second thing completely. And essentially, you take it in turns to turn a card to say what happens to the community. I've forgotten the map. There's a map. And this is the other thing. It's a collaborative, creative game. There is a map in the middle of the table. You start off with various things. One of you can jump in and tell me exactly what, because I can't remember and my PDF has just closed itself.
Well, I was going to add something else about the issue of, it's just the same thing. And yeah, that's like saying every poker game is the same because you use the same 52 cards. The order matters a great deal. Moreover,
that's a much better analogy.
On this deck, most of the cards, if not all of them, have two meanings, where it's like, let me grab my Oracle here, because like a wise primitive, I printed it out. So, two of clubs. Someone returns to the community. Who? Where were they? Or you find a body. Do people recognize who it is? What happened? So, yeah, most of them have either different options or the event unfolds in a way with a lot of player input. So another one, I think it's one of the winter ones, let me just pull it random, is someone goes missing. This is 9 of spades. They're alone in the winter elements. Choose one. The community organizes constant search parties, and eventually the person is found. Project dice are not reduced this week, or no one ever hears from that person again.
Well, yeah, and you, because you can choose between different questions, it comes up differently. Also, you never play the same game twice because you're playing with different people in different times, and there are very few setting elements in the Quiet Year that are actually set in any kind. Well, not even in stone, but like there are rules to sort of decide what level of speculative fiction elements are in this. This could be an incredibly realistic game where you're just people, there's no magic, there's no sci-fi stuff, and you're just trying to scrape by. Or you could be like, when I played it for Role Playing Public Radio, we added like giant crayfish and all kinds of crazy post-apocalyptic gonzo material. It's very easy to create a different run, even with the same cards, even asking the same questions, because players are like, oh, well, I want to say there's a crazy murderous cult next door to her. Like, I want to say this is a very quiet year where we're just normal people doing normal things, trying to scrape by. And yeah, so the game ends when the Frost Shepherds arrive. That means the Quiet Year has ended, not that the community itself has ended, although it could end. So yeah.
Yeah, does one narrate an ending, or is it always open-ended, or is it individual groups choose?
It says when the Frost Shepherd card comes up, the game ends.
Mm-hmm.
That is my reading of it.
Yeah, the shepherds arrive. During play, it's best to leave the Frost Shepherds an elusive mystery, perhaps hinting at what they might be, but never directly answering. The game ends abruptly when the King of Spades is drawn. The card is read aloud, and the game immediately concludes. Once the game is over, it's fine to talk about what they might have been, what their arrival might have meant for the community, or any of the other situations that were faced throughout the year. With the game over, the limits placed on communication and discussion are suddenly lifted. So yeah, it's an intentional part on Alder's design to create. A lot of this game is being very intentional with what you say, what you're allowed to say, and when. Again, I think that's sort of like part of the brilliance of this game is that it is a very concise game. Like, I have the printed version. I backed the original Indiegogo campaign in 2013. And it's just like the size of an instruction manual you'd get for like your camera. Like it's a small, not even like normal zine size. It's
right, can we all take a moment to pause and acknowledge, yes, Ross, you were into the Quiet Year before it was cool.
Cred has been officially established. But yeah, I have the latest PDF now reopened in front of me. It's 16 pages.
Yep.
I mean, that's all. And I'm going to do the footnote at this point that I feel in some way responsible for this, because I was, in many ways, the guy who kind of started off the small form factor, GM-less, story heavy, mechanics light thing with Baron Munchausen in 1998, and then the rest of the New Style games. Munchausen was 24 pages. Could have probably gone less, but the whole thing about the important part of Munchausen is the setting and the tone of the text that sets it up. I don't think it would have worked at 16. The fact that there is so much richness in 16 pages here is just extraordinary. You may look at it on whichever your favorite commercial download site is and go, that seems like a lot of money for not a lot of game. It's a lot of game. It's just not a description of it.
Yeah, you can also get a hard copy version with the rules booklet and a custom deck of cards. Each season is colored differently, and with some tokens for contempt and some dice and a turn summary. And it comes in its own little bag, little burlap bag, which is quite lovely. And so, yeah, that's $52 before shipping. So I think that's there's a lot of
the luxury option.
Well, I mean, like a big hardcover book, is often $50, and I think you're going to get as much gameplay value out of this as you are with a lot of like thick hardcover books. Because that's one way to look at the game is like how much gameplay you get out of it. And certainly I've gotten my money's worth with this. But there are a couple other elements of the base game we should talk about. So the base mechanic is, every week there's a new crisis, as we mentioned, drawing a card. But there's also the projects, which we've mentioned. But the way it works is you can create a project, and when you create a project, you set a die to determine how many weeks it takes to complete. If the project die reaches, so it starts, let's say at 4 or whatever, and then when it gets down to 0, so you just move the die from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, the die gets removed and the project is completed. Whoever started the project gets to tell everyone how it turns out and update the map to reflect its completion. Some cards will cause projects to finish early, some will cause them to delay,
some will just derail them.
Mm-hmm.
And a project could be, I want to plant a pumpkin patch, or a project could be, I want to build a giant biomechanical robot to protect us, depending on what you've established as your tone and setting expectations.
Mm-hmm.
My view of or what jumped out at me as I was reading The Quiet Year is that this is like a history simulator, only it's not history, it's future history, or alternate history, or fantasy history, but it is historical theory separated from the great men theory of history. And the great men theory of history, the very, very short, sketchy version is that history is just this lazy thing that's flopping there until a great man, in the great men theory, proponents always phrase it as a man, comes along and kicks it into a new shape. And these are all these giants of science and politics and religion who have had these visionary inspirations that allow them to change the course of human history. And it's set aside, it's set in opposition to the idea that history happens because huge masses of people are all into one thing at the same time. And, and clearly there are interactions, and clearly there are great historical figures. But I tend to think that even if we hadn't had Adolf Hitler in history, that some kind of disastrous German racist organization would have arisen because there was just too much bitterness and unaddressed animus stewing around. If it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else, and it would have been different, but still would have been some kind of violent, horrendous convulsion. And this is true of, the American Civil War. I mean, if Lincoln hadn't been there, it would have been someone else. The American Revolution, if it hadn't been the Founding Fathers, it would have been someone else, because the British were just asking too much and were far enough away that they couldn't really enforce their will. Although, I will say, thinking about the American Revolution, I'm like, the fact that George III was not functioning well certainly had a powerful impact on, on the way events turned out. But this, to drag this kicking and screaming back on topic, this game is saying, no, we're not going to focus on the heroes. We're going to focus on, because there's no heroes. You don't have your guy in this game. You have your community, and you are passing it around like a tray of hors d'oeuvres for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah. And to clarify a little bit about the basic mechanic, it's actually everyone takes a turn One player is the active player each week. They draw a card, resolve that card. Project dice are reduced by 1, and then the active player chooses and takes one action: discover something new, hold a discussion, or start a project. We already talked about start a project. Discover something new is creating a new map feature, and hold discussion is talking about this. So sort of exploring the sort of, which is world building, like exploring the community and sort of interrogating what is happening, not just in the community, but also the area. And there are mechanics for all of those. And they're very specific about when you can talk and when you can discuss something. So if you want to talk about something, you have to, that has to be your action.
Yes, it's very constrained storytelling. It's very structured. And, you know, as with so many good storytelling games, one must embrace the constraints rather than fight against them. Because if you do, you will create this really interesting narrative. I was talking about the map.
Yes.
Which for me is part of the heart of it. You set up this map, there's a piece of paper in the middle, and this is not representational, it's just diagrammatic. You don't have to be able to draw well. And at the start, everyone agrees to add one feature. I mean, you agree jointly what sort of environment you're going to be, and then everyone adds one feature, and then you decide one, abundance, something that your community has in good quantity, and 2, scarcities, and you add those to the map. And then as the game goes on, other features get added to the map. It becomes this collaborative, creative thing, this ongoing record, not just of the community, but of its growth and its changes as well. And then the frost shepherds appear and the thing is just locked in ice. and that becomes the chronicle of your quiet year. And I think that's fantastic. It's a very, very clever mechanic indeed. And this for me is the heart of a lot of Avery's stuff, and I am a huge fan. She does an awful lot with very little. And you may read through some of her, you know, very slight rule books and think, not quite sure why that's in there. It's there for a reason, and it's a very good reason. And some of these things are just, they don't have a game effect, but they have an effect on the play, or an effect on the story, or an effect on the tone.
Sounds like contempt tokens.
Yes, yes. Tell us about contempt tokens, Greg.
So part of the game, one of the things you can do is choose to discuss things. And so it's like, well, I don't think we should be growing. I don't think we should be building a giant biomechanical thing when we can't even get the pumpkins to grow. And you can go around, and the person who calls the meeting kind of decides how it goes. But let me find the quote. A discussion never results in a decision being made. Everyone weighs in and that's over. This is how conversations work in communities. They are untidy and inconclusive affairs. And I'm like, that's okay. Extremely real. If you feel like you weren't consulted or honored in a decision-making process, you take a piece of contempt and place it in front of you. And this never turns into, oh, well, when you have 15 contempt, this tipping point is reached and the civilization tears itself apart. No, it's just sitting there saying, this is how pissed off I am. And you can give contempt back if you feel better about things. And I love how emblematic it was. As soon as I saw that this game had contempt tokens, I'm like, I think I'll probably like whatever that is. And I was right.
So like I mentioned, the game originally came out in 2013. In 2019, Avery released a new edition of it, and where she clarified some of the text in the rules, but also changed 2 small mechanical things. One was the Ace of Autumns was revised, but the relevant part is the option to discard contempt tokens to justify selfish actions has been removed to aid teachability and to reinforce one of the core themes of the game, how distrust lingers. So that was a change between the first and second edition, I guess.
So it got meaner. Okay. Yeah, I didn't, well, having only had the 219 thing, because, you say you're an Avery fan, but can you name 3 of her games? Oh, no, I can't.
In the original version, it says if you want to act selfishly to the known detriment of the community, you can discard a contempt token to justify your behavior. You decide whether your behavior requires justification. This will often trigger others taking contempt tokens in response. So, it still leaves in the rule that you can, if someone else does something that you greatly support, that would mend relationships and rebuild trust, you can discard a contempt token to demonstrate how they have diffused past tensions.
Right. The thing I was going to go back to, I like the map. And have we moved on to how it does what it does?
Talking about the mechanics of the game is still what it does.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I like the map because I feel it gives it this interesting sort of visual kinesthetic thing to it. And you don't have to be a great artist to play The Quiet Year. The example map looks like something the three of us could have done.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's part of the point, I think. It's everyone's involved. It's not meant to look lovely. It's just, it's a record.
Yeah, it specifically says it doesn't matter if you can draw or not. You're going to draw on this map. I have a scan of the one we did for the RPPR game, and I just looked it up, and it is very, very simple. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. Like that's the whole point, that you're supposed to participate in this game. Like
honestly, the thing that stuck me about the map, and this is was the line: scarcities of running water and transportation are both drawn in as well. And I'm just like, how? It's like Pictionary. How do you draw a scarcity of transportation?
Broken bridge.
I guess.
And scarcity of water can be a poisoned well or a dried up riverbed.
So you got to draw a whole well and then a skull and crossbones over it.
Or you could just make the graveyard a little bigger. Yeah. That's one of the challenges of this game is like, there's very little text, but it's very specific about it once, and so you have to so it's demanding at times to be like, what does this mean? You have to think about what words are on here.
But again, it is like Pictionary. I think the people who do badly at Pictionary are artists because they think, how can I do a beautiful representation of the subject I've been given to draw? The people who are actually good at it are the people who just start sketching immediately and sketch any old thing, but can convey. And I think that's what the map is. It's you find a way to convey it. And because you've talked about it, everyone knows what that is, what that thing represents. And it may just end up looking like a scribble to somebody who wasn't there, but to those who were there, that's the poison weed or
that's an ink blot. Oh no, that is the battlefield where so many good men and women fell to the pyre. No, dude, that's an ink blot.
Yeah, looking back at the map that I made, these years ago, I was like, I would have to re-listen to the thing in order to remember what every little line meant, actually. It's pretty vague. It's pretty abstract. And I think it's partially also like challenging people to get a little bit out of their comfort zone because a lot of people would never want to draw because they're not good at it, and so this is like, no, it doesn't matter. You still have to try. So, yeah, I think now we're ready to go on to how the game does what it does.
I liked the use of cards mapping to weeks and suits mapping to seasons. I'm like, that's just a tight little correspondence that, like, I hadn't thought of that. 52 weeks, 52 cards, 4 seasons, 4 suits. That's extremely tight. And so I like how that works, and I like how you randomize it within seasons, but the seasons all stay in the same order. I'm like, okay, this is taking something everyone has lying around their house, a deck of cards, and using it in an interesting way and evoking symbolic correspondences and sort of, there's a word I'm looking for that's not epistemological. It's the study of symbols. Come on, you guys.
Semiotics.
Semiotic. So it's a very semiotically tidy correspondence, which I'm sure is a nerdy and deeply niche thing to get excited about. But it's COVID times. I gotta take my excitement where I can get it.
Yeah, Avery Alder, very interested in these topics. All of her games sort of involve these. On her About page on her website, she says, I want to learn how to build healthy communities, repair relationships, liberate the imagination, escape the clutches of capitalism. And all of her games focus on these sort of topics. Dream Askew is also about post-apocalyptic communities, the collapse of civilization and rebuilding, we banded together to form a queer enclave, a place to live, sleep, and hopefully heal. What lies in the rubble for this close-knit group of queers? Could it be utopia? Rip and Drive is a road trip game, and the music you listen to on the open road. And so she has a very clear idea of her work, and this is sort of her first major work. And it really starts popping in because there's very few setting elements. One of the things it does do is say this is a community of 60 to 80 people, which gives a real interesting focus to the community, because you can't really, especially recently, there are games about building, doing world building and like things like Microscope and Fellowship, which are much larger scale. But this is this is very focused. You're like, everyone knows everyone else by name in this community, and
it's interesting. But there have been games about communities, about building communities before. And Greg is going to remember, what was the last unicorn game that they did before they did all the licenses? Aeon?
Oh, I know the one you're talking about. The one that was impossible.
The one that, yes, another impossible role-playing game in 2 massive volumes. And it was you created the world and you played out the world, and it was a fantastic folly, and I could never work out how to play it.
Nobody could. I believe even the author came out and said, "Yeah, I did that while I was getting a sociology degree, and it is this thing I acknowledge unplayable."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the other one, of course, is Ars Magica that we talked about last session, which is explicitly about the Covenant. It's about your community, and all the characters are part of this community, and everything feeds back into that community. And really, it's the story of the community rather than the story of the individual characters, because characters come and characters go, particularly the Grogs. So it has been done before. That territory has been explored before, but often within the context of traditional role-playing structures, often at some length, talking about Aeon again.
Cough, cough, rain, cough, cough.
Yeah, this is 2030. When did Rain come out? But one could make the argument that Pendragon is the same thing again, which is it's about the court, it's about the chivalric order.
The first edition is 2007 for Rain.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. There's a review on RPG.net about it. So, yep.
But this feels like something different. This feels like something fresher, and one only has to look at its influence as well. I think an awful lot of games picked up on this, and if they didn't take the whole thing, they took elements from it, and some people did take large chunks of it. Ken Height's Killing Bugsy Siegel, which actually appears in my game Las Vegas, which came out not that long after, or at least Ken wrote Killing Bugsy Siegel not that long after, is again a game based around storytelling with a deck of cards in different orders, and it's really interesting to kind of map one against the other. Although that's not so much community driven, he takes the storytelling system from it, but he leaves the community stuff behind. Something I've been looking at is Avery did a follow-up game a few years later. I don't have a date on it. It doesn't seem to have a date on it, with Mark D.S. Truman, called The Deep Forest, it's essentially the Quiet Year without the colonialist elements. And you are not a community of humans, which is an unspoken thing within the Quiet Year, but is, I think, assumed by an awful lot of people. You are explicitly a community of monsters who have been driven out of somewhere, and you're just trying to survive. And instead of it being the Frost Shepherds coming on the King of Spades, it's the heroes. And again, the heroes arrive and the game abruptly ends. And it's really interesting because a lot of the changes are simply in the vocabulary. The structure is broadly similar, but just changing few of the elements. And simply the way that things are spoken, the game takes on a very different tone. I believe it's a free download. It's linked.
Yeah,
it's linked.
I just downloaded it. Yeah,
it's linked to from the Quiet Year PDF that I have. There's a couple of little changes, like the contempt tokens. They don't go in front of the player. They go in front of one of the particular monsters' dens on the map, so you know which monster is feeling the contempt. Which I think is more elegant, but perhaps might weaken the story. I haven't played Deep Forest, but I've forgotten how I got onto this. But yes, it exists. It's doing the community thing, but with I'm not going to say turned on its head, but turned to face in a very different direction to the original. I think the two should be read really as a pair. It's like reading the Earthsea books and then reading I'm going to get this wrong, the fourth one, the one that's from the female point of view. And it's suddenly, okay. So it was the first three books were a yin, and then there's a yang. So yes, it's really interesting. And that an author goes back and looks at their own work in that kind of way, and collaborates with Mark Diaz-Truman, who I believe has just made a quite astonishing amount of money with the his Kickstarter for Avatar. Yes, is it the highest RPG Kickstarter of all time? It's certainly one of the highest Kickstarters.
Yeah, I think it cleared 10 million or close to 10 million. So yeah, I believe it. At tabletop role playing games, I believe it's number one. An amazing Kickstarter.
And an amazing designer. I'm not going to say he's a good designer because he's very rich. I think he's very rich because he's a very good designer. I backed Cartel back in the day, which is a really lovely piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, Magpie also published Bluebeard's Bride, I believe. So.
Of course they do. Yeah, of course. So. That was stupid of me.
Yeah. Weird. The same names start coming up as we look at these.
It's the industry is not actually that big.
No, it's not. One thing though, in talking about the Quiet Year's influence, I believe I'd have to study this a little more carefully, but there is one of the earlier storytelling games that I believe focuses explicitly. Well, like Alder's other games like Monster Hearts and Dream Askew, as I mentioned, are very queer focused, but like there's a huge community or scene of like games that are, especially ones published on itch.io, but not exclusively there, that are really focusing on storytelling games that are not traditional role-playing games, that are really focused on like building up about relationships and about people, and especially queer people, like Monster Hearts, which is, about monstrous teenagers trying to fit into society. And it's obviously a lot of that. Wait, that could be being a literal monster might be a metaphor for being like an outcast, like a queer teenager. Weird. So
who could have guessed such a thing?
Yeah, exactly. And I've played some of these games, and I know some of the people who have played them, and it's a very different experience than, say, like playing a trad RPG. It's very much on, role playing in the sense of like creating scenes and characters that are memorable. I mean, there are some of these games that I played, like one of the regular people who shows up in RPPR, Bridget. She's run some amazing like one-shot scenarios that, and it's really interesting to see this alternate design space and alternate, people who have very different ideas about what a game should be and what it should do. They're very interested in like role-playing games as like cathartic, like to process their life and to talk about it and to make meaningful art. And I think the Quiet Year is, if you're interested in this kind of game and that kind of experience, the Quiet Year is a really good experience. When I played it more wacky and gonzo as I did. I would like to play it with people who wanted to do like a sincere game about people, about a quiet year, which I think the game is more intending to, but not limited to, obviously, because it's open to the players. So yeah.
Well, something I've been thinking about with fiction. I'm going to go off on a little tangent, but I think it's extremely. I mean, probably I see this in fiction because I saw it first in gaming, and in gaming it is much broader and undeniable. So I think of fiction as existing stretched between the writer who writes it and the reader who reads it, right? And the death of the author thing says, no, it's all the reader. But I mean, if there's nothing for the reader to read, there's no fictional experience. And at the same time, there are people who are like, well, the writer controls everything. But no, language is an imprecise tool. To some degree, always, to a great degree, often. And when you have ambiguity at any point in your text, that is an invitation to the reader to interpret or imagine what that might mean. And to me, I've more and more wanted to leave ambiguity in so that the reader can add themselves to the piece. In gaming, this is much more obvious. It's like, okay, I can write what the rules of the game are, but you are going to be in charge of what you choose to do at the table. And so I think that a lot of what's going on with this is opening up that space between the writer and the player, or the writer and the reader.
And one really good example of that, I think, is actually the contempt tokens, because the contempt tokens, like is also a really good element of like how the game does what it does. Because one comment I have seen in discussions of this game, and certainly this came up in our own playthrough, is people being dissatisfied with the contempt tokens as a game mechanic, because unlike everything else in this game, it doesn't have a mechanical. There's no.
It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything in game terms.
No. That is, correct. And people like, why do we even have them if we're not doing anything with them? Because everything else is like a tight loop, a closed loop. You draw the cards, you do the projects, or you take your action and you move on. But like, that's, I think, obviously, Alder's intention as a designer is like, well, guess what they represent, and guess what? It's creating dissatisfaction at the game table because you have these tokens that you can't get rid of, and there's no like, oh, if you have too many tokens at the end, the Frost Shepherds give you a bad ending. If you have not many, then you have a good ending. Like, that would be the obvious thing to do, but like, this game purposefully does not do that as a statement to be like, well, this is what they represent, and now you're going to feel a little bit of contempt and dissatisfaction because like they're there on the game.
Yes, it's almost it's there's an unspoken thing there about the whole thing. If you die unhappy, if you take your misery to the grave, then your soul will be unquiet, and there'll be a sense that the story has never really ended. It is better to die without that contempt than assuming that you do die at the end. And I think something I've done in a couple of games, and when I read that, partly the contempt token thing, but also the thing about the game just ending, is this a rule that the designer intends to be broken? Is it phrased like this as almost as a challenge to the players, and go, I'm going to tell you how to play it, but without explicitly saying, do your own thing. I'm encouraging you here to do your own thing. I don't know, but that was I wondered if that was it.
I don't think Alder wanted people to do that. I think Alder said, this is how you're doing the game. This is what the game is about. But like, on the other hand, they also expressed people and being very excited about people using this as a way to world build RPG settings in other games. So I'll talk more about that later. But so she's open to people using the game in unintended ways.
I was going to say, it seems like a bit of a stretch to say, oh, Avery clearly wanted us to do X, and in order to encourage that, what she said was explicitly not X, don't do it. I'm like, I don't think we're playing 4-dimensional chess in her mind palace. I think when she said don't do X, what she meant was she didn't want us to do X.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I don't think she was playing mind games. I don't think that's her.
Mind games, baby! Woo!
I mean, the thing that comes across all of her work, at least to me, is sincerity. Like, she really does, wear her heart on her sleeve and like wants to make these very honest games.
Yeah, it's almost heartbreakingly, honest at some point. I just think Brave Little Sparrow or Brave Sparrow is which is almost a micro game. It's a solo game. I'm not going to spoil it. If you're listening to this and you haven't read Brave Sparrow, download Brave Sparrow. It's extraordinary. It's one. I read it once and it stays with me. And it's.
This is going to make me sad.
It's surreal, but at the same time, it's a little bit sad. But at the same time, there's a truth to it. Mm-hmm. And it fits in exactly with the kind of the meta text that you were talking about queer spaces and trying to find safe spaces for alternate identities, which role-playing games have been for decades and decades. You go back through the history of the hobby, and that there's trans people cropping up all over the place. I think partly because this imaginative space was somewhere that they could be themselves, but also the community as well, or large chunks of it, have been welcoming and open to people with different identities. And, some trans people have risen to very high levels within the industry as well. And footnote, and that's something we should be incredibly proud of as well. We should nurture them and champion them.
So, like another thing is the game specifically says it's for 2 to 4 players, but most of the times I could see, in my own experience, I believe I ran it with 5 people. I'd have to check. But, I could see this game scaling very well for larger groups. And so, there's that as well. I just want to mention that. But, one thing is, we already compared it to Ars Magica, but, looking at the density of rules from Ars Magica to the Quiet Year, and, the Quiet Year is obviously very much a one-shot game. You play a complete game in 2 to 4 hours. You can get 2 to 4 hours of gameplay from this tiny booklet and deck of cards, and versus Ars Magica, which is meant to be played and only fully enjoyed after you play multiple sessions and you're really invested in
massive campaigns. Yeah.
Massive campaigns, but I think that's sort of this is a very elegant game because it gets to what you actually do in a game and actually pay attention to in a game without adding
layers of manipulation.
Yeah, layers of stuff that you don't want to use or you misremember, it's like encumbrance rules in D&D. Is it really adding on to the game? Do you really want the game to be about encumbrance? The Quiet Year has a very laser focus on what it wants to do, and it does it and knows that you don't need anything else. And you don't actually need that many rules in order to create an interesting game if that's what your vision is. So I find that really in some ways inspiring and also intimidating because it's oh man, I could have written a lot less for my game. Maybe I should focus on that in the future. Less is more, I think, because I know whenever I'm running a game, it's more the rules I don't remember. It's I'm only really running maybe 30 to 50% of the game rules. I'm really only engaging with it, even in a relatively simple game like Delta Green, which is pretty easy to run by traditional RPG standards, I think, compared to say Ars Magica or GURPS, for example. There's still a lot of stuff like bureaucracy rules to acquire gear, or certain other systems that I often screw up or kind of hand wave.
Or hand wave, yes.
Yeah. I think that's a key element of how it does what it does. But
my notes for how do people play is just three little entries: no ongoing campaigns, no prep. Ideal for cons.
Because also you're all participating in the map drawing, so it's You're all around the table, and you all
Yeah.
have that common thing, and then you
No
can,
prep.
Yeah.
And the more kids you have, the more you probably appreciate the beauties of a no prep game.
Yeah, this is really an all ages game. Now that I think about it, in a way that few of our games have been that we've talked about on this, because the language is very simple but very direct, and like the questions I think are, someone new arrives, who, or two of the younger members get into a fight, what provoked them? Like those are the kind of prompts that like anyone can answer and come up with a good response.
You kind of do want to see this played by a gang of 7-year-olds now, don't you? Perhaps with an adult present to sort of moderate and manipulate the cards and whatnot. And, keep
if I remember correctly, there's a mention once or twice of a facilitator. And I don't think it's ever properly explained or really gone into any detail, but there is a sense that Avery's thought about this being run with someone, perhaps, just almost in the background to make sure the story stays on track.
Well, and it's at the beginning, it has, read this part aloud. As the facilitator, read the regular text of this chapter aloud to the group, following the instructions written in italics as you go. So it's very scripted in its presentation of how you get into it.
Yeah, I think the facilitator is just the person who is assumed to own the game and is the one teaching the game. Like that's actually one of the things this game explicitly says is like it's 3 to 4 hours including teaching the game, which very few games really take that into account at all. It is very nice.
And I'm going to jump in here. It explicitly tells you how to teach it as well. It gives you text to read to the players. Almost I'm going to get foofy here. It's almost ritualistic. It's almost you do things in a very particular way, in a very particular order, and it's quite meticulous. And if you're doing this with a different group of players, with people who'd never come across it before, then there's a very good reason for that. If you're doing it with the same players, then you do it for the second time, you do it for the third time or something. It acquires almost a kind of a ritualistic overtone to it. This is what you do at the start of a game of the Quiet Year. And I think that's very much part of the atmosphere of the thing, part of the opening up this other space, this magic circle, almost this sacred space in which the game and the story is going to take place. And I've waffled about the magic circle in the past, but the idea of it just being punctured at the end by the drawing of this card, and suddenly this space has gone, this community has gone. I forget who wrote it, there's a tiny little indie role-playing game out. It's like this one-page conceptual thing where you come up, you say there's, in the next room, there is a perfect but incredibly fragile society that has in some way emerged. And if it is in any way disturbed, it immediately ends. You destroy it, almost by thinking about it, you destroy it. And it's a game that you can't play the game because the moment you start to think about the game ends. And there's almost an element of that, but in a kind of a much bigger way, that a game that sets out to create this space, quite this mental space, this shared space, and then deliberately punctures it at the end. And
again, the Frost Shepherds. Now that the more I think about it, the more I really admire the Frost Shepherds arrive. The game is over. Like you always want them leaving wanting more. And like that's the hell of a way to do it. And like if you play it right before dinner, then you have something to talk about at dinner. You have something to like especially at a con, like we talk about a con, like if you with a group of strangers, you could like now you have something like, well, what do you think would happen after that? So everyone can come up with their own headcanon of what happens or who the Frost Shepherds are, or are they even people? Is it just a term they use to describe a winter storm? What does it mean?
I would choose to seduce the Frost Shepherds.
Roll. Yeah. Yes, thank God that can't happen.
So going back to the I think we're on to how people play it.
Which I mean that's a pretty, I think that's going to be kind of a brief aspect of because it's like it's very, very specific and at the same time very, very bounded. And the only reason you would change its limits and boundaries is if you didn't actually want to be playing the Quiet Year if you wanted to be playing Ars Magica or something else. And you're like, well, how can we turn...
punctuated by gunfire.
How are we going to turn this into an ongoing campaign with, singular heroes whose trajectory from scrappy farm boy whose parents were killed by orcs to warlord of the wastelands? And it's like, no, you're now playing something else. Play Apocalypse World for that.
Well, actually, that's what's happened. And like I mentioned earlier,
of course, it's what's happened.
Alder didn't really expect people to use it as a world building way to set up an RPG campaign, but people have. Actually, very popular podcasts like the Adventure Zone, run by the McElroy brothers, have used it. And many other groups would be like, all right, we're going to play D&D, or we're going to play Apocalypse World, but we're going to set up our community, our home base, with this. We're going to run a session of the Quiet Year, and that's going to be our village. And then when the Frost Shepherd arrives, that's when the campaign begins. Or they'll house rule it to say, we're not going to go all the way to winter. We're going to start in autumn or whatever. And I could certainly, if I was to gun to the head, run a D&D campaign, well, I'll do that. We could just do a session Quiet Year to kickstart the, because then it's a collaborative thing. Every player gets input, and by the end of that session of the Quiet Year, everyone knows that area. Everyone knows
and the conflicts have been installed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a brilliant way to do a session 0.
It's also players have also talked about it would be easy to create new cards and new questions, or even to go cardless, to simply have house rule one player to ask 2 different questions that then the active player has to choose from. So once you've played a few sessions, you get a sense of what are good questions, what are bad questions. And I feel like there are resources or communities that are able to do that.
Yeah, I talked at the start about the possibility of taking some of the cards out to give you a different experience each time, so you don't know what's going to happen. I wondered about the possibility of adding your own cards in.
Now you're just talking crazy talk.
But as a way of, it's a way of altering the narrative, but within the same constraints and within the structure that the game establishes. I think that could work in a really interesting way.
But then you would still be playing the Quiet Year, just the house ruled Quiet Year. I want to complain about the use of the future tense, which I know I sound like a broken record, but there's a very easy way to shut me up, which is stop making this very simple but annoying mistake. I don't want to be that guy, but God, I'm so much that guy. I counted. There are 41 uses of the future tense in 16 pages, and that's with a lot of art and very efficient writing. And I'm like, it's so close, but it could be more efficient if... Let me find... listen to the sound of pages rustling so you'll know I'm taking this seriously. If, ironically, in the section pacing, instead of spring will ask us a lot of questions and we will learn more about our community's inner workings and surrounding landscape, and summer larger threats of greater progress will both emerge, autumn will challenge us with more serious dangers and losses. That could be spring asks us a lot of questions and we learn more about our community's inner workings and surrounding landscape. In summer, larger threats and greater progress both emerge. Autumn challenges us with more serious dangers and losses. It's not hard. I feel like once people know, everyone will just take it for granted that that's how you should do it, right?
Have you ever wondered if people are doing it deliberately to piss you off, Greg?
I'm not that paranoid, and I don't think I'm that important. And I mean, it still sometimes slips into my own work, but every time I see it, I just become so consumed with self-hatred that I never let it happen very often. So,
yeah.
Please, future game designers, show kindness to an aging man.
Yes, you can use the future conditional if you're writing a time travel game. That's acceptable.
Nope, not even that.
God. It's trying to find a loophole somewhere.
Yeah.
I will die on this hill, and I will take every one of you with me.
You really will. It is very.
Oh no! I should have said, I'm dying on this hill, and I'm taking every one of you with me.
Let the listeners decide that. We'll let them be the judge of that. Let us know in the comments. I do want to say, thinking about how people play it.
Yes.
One thing we haven't really mentioned at all. There is one element, which are the resources, in that you have an abundance and you have a scarcity, and this is sort of something to drive conflict and storylines in the game. So I just want to mention that as another element of the game. But the Quiet Year probably is a game that is very structured in terms of when you can talk and when you are not allowed to talk, which very few other games even really acknowledge as a thing. I wonder how closely groups actually follow that. Because most games are free flowing conversations where people interrupt each other, people run long, people meander, or people don't say enough and they miss their cue. In Quiet Year, the ritualistic element is really like who can talk and when. It's almost like a call and response in a church to a degree of like, I do this, now you say this, and we move on. So I don't know. I think when I played it, I remember we tried to take that rule pretty closely, but James, what do you think? Do you think is that something that gets violated frequently in these kind of games? Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I think the Quiet Year has become almost emblematic of a particular style of game. I said how influential it's been. I think know. Also, people who don't play this sort of game think about a lot of story games in terms of the Quiet Year or in terms of their perception of the Quiet Year. I think people do. They try to play it, or they will start off playing it by the rules, as I think most of us do. And some groups will move away from that. They will find a rhythm or a set of beats that works better for them in creating the type of stories that they want to create. Whether it's a proper Quiet Year story or not is debatable. But
everything gets house ruled. It's just like encumbrance.
It's true. Everybody brings their own stuff to it. And I said, I think Avery's writing is incredibly. I think the structure is incredibly fine. I think a lot of the little nuances and little hints in there are beautifully judged. It's quite possible a lot of people don't pick up on it. I know, in much longer games where particular rules have been stressed for pages at a time, I completely forget that those rules exist or simply pay no attention to them. It's quite possible that people either gloss over a rule that isn't stressed or a point that isn't stressed or a little a tweak, or alternatively interpret it or think they have it right, but don't. I mean, as I don't think very few of us ever played D&D the way Gary Gygax intended us to, and I think Gary Gygax was probably quite disgusted by that. But the community became much richer because of it, and I think one of the reasons that it's been so influential is people have played it and worked out very quickly how to tweak it, how to house rule it, how to turn it into the game they want to be, not their own version of the Quiet Year, but a different game using a similar structure. And it's a very short game. It's very easy to rewrite. It's very easy to reskin. Very easy to put your own spin on it. And it's gone out there, and they've kind of become almost I'm not going to say an ambassador, but its influence has spread widely.
Yeah. Well, and I like that because as I'm looking at this, what my insights were with, why do people play it the way they play it, is this, I'm reading this, I'm like, this is genuinely taking some assumptions, often unconsidered or underconsidered assumptions, and just yanking the rug out from underneath them. It's like, oh, there must be winning. No, there's no winning in the quiet game. Frost Shepherds show up. That's what happens. I mean, there must be protagonists. No, this is the story of a collective.
Even the little triumphs that you get in most tabletop role-playing games. There's minor successes, but
yeah. Well, I mean, the little thing, you gotta celebrate the little thing. And then, the assumption that there has to be a climax, that it has to, you need your rising action and then the big finale, and then, and then falling action in the sort of 5-act or 3-act structure. But, this is like, no, here's some stuff that happens. And then it stops. And, and finally the assumption that mechanics must do something other than give form to feeling. And I'm like, but that's all contempt tokens do, is they take your incoherent did I pronounce that right? Your unformed sense of dissatisfaction and give you a tangible object that you can hear clatter against the pages or clatter against the tabletop and map as you drop it in front of you saying, this didn't satisfy me. I don't like it. And so, yeah, it's doing a lot of new stuff and pushing games in new directions. And I'm like, that's probably why it was so popular, is that people like things that are new. And I mean, people also like things that are the same but different. And this, I think, is much more on the different end of the same but different. And generally, it is harder to succeed with something that is very different and a little the same than it is to succeed with something that is very the same but a little different. So kudos to Avery for managing, for taking a big swing and connecting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think when it came out it felt revolutionary. But looking back on it now, after 8 years, it still doesn't feel revolutionary. What it does feel is subversive. It takes an awful lot of the tropes that we've grown used to in group storytelling games, including role-playing games, but also the stuff that came out of the Forge, the stuff that came out of New Style, all the rest of that, and it just quietly tweaks it and pushes it in its own direction. It uses dice. It uses them as scoring tokens. You never roll the dice. That's beautiful. I love the dice are on the table. If you like dice, the dice are just there. You just never roll them. You never get that little bit of magic, hope and anticipation and random surprise when a dice rolls. The dice are deterministic. And there are many other games that do that, but not like this, not in the way.
I can't think of one that does it exclusively. They exist only as counters. And, you could have done anything for counters. The dice are something that everyone will have on hand, and which interact nicely with the landscape of the physical map. But yeah,
I think the new Warhammer 40k RPG Wrath and Glory, there's a Wrath die that I believe is used as a counter, and as you build up Wrath, you can unleash certain abilities if you're a Space Marine or something. But that's the only other uses of die as a counter I can think of off the top of my head.
13th Age.
Several board games as well.
I was just talking about RPGs. Yeah. Boy, isn't it?
The escalation die in 13th Age, it's like, okay, well,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
When it's 1, everything's normal. When it's 2, things get you add the escalation die to different effects, and so that by the time you're 6 rounds into a combat, you're really chugging along. So
yeah, I always think of the escalation die in 13th Age as the playing music as someone's giving a thank you speech at the Oscars to like hurry them up. It's like, get this fight over with. Stop missing so many hits. Hurry up. But yeah, we'll talk about more if we do that episode. One question that I would have, I actually just did a search, and I found, you talked about the Deep Forest as a quiet year hack or adaptation. I found another one.
I would say companion piece myself.
But companion piece. Yeah. There's a third party one called For Guild and Glory, a quiet year free variant, where it's set in a medieval fantasy setting where players are looking over an adventuring guild, and the Dark Lord is going to arrive, and are they going to be stand up? So It's like, well, let's make it D&D. Okay.
Yeah, it's like, this is like if someone looked at the Wright brothers plane and said, "How can we make this a boat, though?"
Yeah. But I mean, that's sort of the question. Like, I would love to hear from both of you. Like, what kind of variant or adaptation you would do the Quiet Year? I mean, I have one in mind. So I'll go first since I introduced it. So mine would be called The Quiet Condo, and this would be essentially an adaptation of the Ballard novel High Rise. You are in you're in
a condo was not quiet.
It was not quite. Well, maybe it's quiet because everyone's dead. So it's 60 to 80 people on one floor in a luxury high-rise building, a condominium, and and everyone just decides to stay in, or maybe they can't leave because there's a zombie apocalypse going outside. The building itself is an arcology, has plenty of resources, certainly enough to last more than a year. And at the end of the year, the outsiders appear. Are they rescuers? Are they invaders, raiders trying to take your stuff? Is it a plague that will wipe you all out? So what happens in the year in your condo? Do you build a utopia, or are you all going to go barbecue the neighbor's chihuahua because you need food, you need some meat? That is obviously a very different interpretation, but of the spirit of the Quiet Year. But I mean, architecture and horror are sort of my things.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't know what I'd do with the Quiet Year. It would be easier to think of something if I played it.
We could do this as an actual play. This game would, I think, translate very well online with a whiteboard.
Well, maybe. Yeah. I don't know that I agree.
Okay.
I feel that having the tangible tooth of the paper under your pen would really add something to it for me, and that just like, oh, well, okay, I'll draw with my finger on my trackpad and hope that the program doesn't crash out. I don't know that would satisfy me.
All right, fair.
I know what I'd do. Well, one of two versions. I'm very into kind of I mentioned constraints and constrained environments. I would put it on a small your shipwreck survivors on a small island, and it's a small island, and you are. At least you think you are the only people there because you've circumnavigated. You've walked around the coast. You know that you've
walked the periphery.
Exactly. So your resources are finite. You may find stuff, but you're not going to suddenly discover the city or the hatch from Lost. What you've got is what you've got, and dealing with that for a quiet year. And so the focus is thrown absolutely on the community and the people within it. And those interrelationships. That's the way I would take it. Or I'd put it in a moon base. You're part of a small colony on the moon. You look up one wing. Oh, look, all those flashes on the surface of the Earth. Wonder what's going on there.
Jeez, dude, dark.
And then that's it. And at the end, the spaceship lands, and you've no idea who's in it. That's the way I'd take it, but then that's the kind of stories I would be interested in exploring within this space. Although I think it's if I'm looking for a dramatic story, that's what I'd do. But I think it has a huge advantages in it does what an awful lot of role-playing games don't. It can be very kind of almost meditative. The clue's in the name. It's a quiet year. And not all the incidents are going to be quiet, but overall this is a year that doesn't have, as we've said, it doesn't build up to a climax. It doesn't have the big beats of the story structure, deliberately so.
You know what? I thought of the quiet dungeon. What happens to a dungeon a year after the big bad evil guy is slain? Like the evil's gone out. Maybe do new occupants move in,
or indeed the player characters have left, having slaughtered half. Having taken all the valuables and killed half of the inhabitants.
Yeah.
Wow. Yep. That worked.
That's great.
Yeah. That's how you turn it into D&D. As a stinging critique of the entire dungeon crawl endeavor. Okay, what would I do? I'd be tempted to see if there's a way you can turn the map instead of measuring measuring space. I'm like, okay, let's make it the quiet timeline. And so the map, I do it as like some kind of long strip, and the cards are not events, but locations. And you're trying to track what is happening across the history of a culture, or probably maybe one culture in particular. And it's like, let's see if we can build the past and, explain the present. And so I would replace the arrival of the Frost Shepherds with a negotiated, this is the crisis we want our culture to be in at the end of the game. And we are going to create a backstory of how we got to this crisis. I don't know if it would work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would work, or if I'm just, doing big stunty stuff because I'm like, I gotta come up with something good. I gotta do it for the listeners.
Yeah.
That reminds me of something that indeed Quiet Year reminds me of, which is Microscope. Is the lovely, lovely game of not just you're not world building, you're timeline building, you're creating a chronology. And I've used that to teach students world building and backstory creation and narrative creation. And again, it's you can do it with zero prep. You can do it. There's creativity. It's a very collaborative thing. It's much more structured, and I think there's much more a sense that you're on the outside of the story within Microscope. The thing I like about the Quiet Year is even though you don't have a character, you're not necessarily invested within the community in the traditional way you would be with a role-playing game. You still feel invested. You still feel like you are part of the story, and what happens in the story is important to you.
It's a very zoomed in look of a community because it's a very small community. It's over a relatively limited period of time, and 60 to 80 people in the community. So like you're going to be able to name certain characters,
I can see how, unless you were deliberately holding yourself aloof, it would be pretty easy to get invested in these history's underdogs who are stuck in this situation who don't even know that the frost blade of Damocles is hanging over their heads.
So the Quiet Year, cannot recommend it enough. If you print and play the cards or use the online resource to look up what a normal deck of cards can do, what each card represent, what 2 questions each card has.
Yeah, I mean the bargain option is buy the PDF, dump it to your printer, boom.
Yeah,
grab some. Yeah, you're good to go.
Mm-hmm. So, that I think that wraps up this discussion. Unless you have any final words on it.
I have been drinking while we've been doing this. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm prepared to be shot down and stuff. But I do feel, as I've said, I'm a big fan of Avery's work. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of her work, and this in particular, is. The art word has been bandied around an awful lot over the history of games and role-playing games. And I think this is one of those titles, one of the few titles that one can point at and go, if we are creating art, then genuinely this is where we're, one of the things that gets closest to being a work of art in its own right, not in the stories it creates, but just the game itself is a work of art to the extent that it's taken all the promise that, Gygax and Arneson started in the 70s, and in fact predating things, Wells, and I've just been reading through Kieran Gillen's Die, which the final trade paperback for that has just come out. If you don't know it, it's a graphic novel. It's the D&D cartoon with grown-ups for grown-ups. And it hits some really big themes, and it's really, really good. I absolutely recommend it without hesitation. Kieran is now has designed a role-playing game set in the same game world, which will be coming out from Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, who are the people who did Spire, which we may all be talking about. And Kieran explores a lot of these things we've talked about, a lot of these themes and the history of how games and how game storytelling has developed over time. And it's refined and it's refined and it's refined and it's refined every generation. And I think we're starting to, with games like this, which, as I say, 8 years old, you feel that moment of kind of almost magic. It's a very accessible game. Anyone can play this. You need no prior experience with role play, with narrative games at all. You could sit down and play this with, in my case, my parents. My father is dead, sadly. My mother, who is now 92, she probably wouldn't play this, but she could if I could persuade her to, and she would enjoy it. It's very accessible. It's very immediate. It's zero prep, even for people who have never played a narrative game like this before, and they will have an experience which I think, if they follow the structure as laid down, they will have a moving experience that stays with them in the way that the best novels and the best films do as well. And I think that's art. I think,
I don't know if I'll say they will, but I will say it's certainly very possible. Even the greatest novel or painting or song is going to leave some people cold. And I'm sure there are people for whom the Quiet Year just won't function the way it's intended. And I mean, every adult who designs a game eventually finds out that not everybody loves their work. But not to diminish, however, the assertion that if any game is art, this is art. Thinking about it, I'm like, okay, what game would I say that is a work of art? I would go with De Profundis. But again, that's much more in my gloomy emo wheelhouse. I don't know. I tend to shy away from a discussion of, are role-playing games art, though, because I have been so thoroughly negatively conditioned. It's like, I'm like a dog that got sprayed every time you said, "Is our game's art?" And then you spray it in the face with the plant mister. And pretty soon, that dog is, as soon as he hears our game's art, his tail's going to drop and he's just going to skulk away to the corner of the bedroom.
But I can't remember who it was who said it. He said, art does not come and lie in the beds we make for it. We can discuss our game's art endlessly, and we'll turn around and discover that games are art while we were talking about it. I think, I don't know if Avery set out to create something of, that could create art that might even be art in its own right. I think she has. And, with the benefit of looking back on it and looking at it within its context and within the wider context of what, media and storytelling, I think it's a unique thing. I think it does something in a unique way. And I think it does it with a great deal of beauty and poignancy. And, for me, art is about creating experiences that move us. And bingo, it does. That
was a argument I made and which was responded to in breathtaking bad faith. So I'm just going to step away. I will add something from the author Daniel Pinkwater, who was talking about writing and about his experiences in art school, making prints and painting. And he said, yeah, there's clearly a difference between capital A art and, just art with a small a, which is, someone made a carving, someone made a painting, someone, plinked out a song on the guitar. And he's like, and I'm not sure how you can tell when small a art becomes capital A art consistently. But one thing I have learned is that the fastest and most certain way to make small a art is to set out to create capital A art. And so I'm like, yeah, my creative mantra is fuck around and find out. Let's see what's in here. Let's see what happens if I do this. And yeah, sometimes you find out something good, as it turns out.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end the episode. So if you want to determine this for yourself, there's one way to find out, and that's to play it. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all so much for supporting the Kickstarter. I want to give a special shout out to Sentinel Hill Press, publisher of the Arkham Gazette and other Lovecraftiana. Thank you for supporting the Kickstarter.
And I will give a special thanks to backer Christoph Nafjen. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm like, have I seen that name in my social media and stuff and backer lists before? And, it's possible that it should be pronounced Christophe Knife Gun, but that's maybe a little too on the nose in the role-playing game community. But however it's pronounced, thanks.
And I want to thank Tyler Thompson, another one of the backers, who I believe is the chap who does publish a number of role-playing material in his own right, and therefore probably has opinions of his own about what constitutes art and otherwise in the storytelling space. And I hope, even if you don't agree with us, you found some material to chew on in tonight's episode.
All right.
Well said.
We'll talk to you all later.
Ta-ta.
Bye.